Hi, Taiwo.
Hello, hi Alma.
It's lovely to see you, and thank you for agreeing to have this conversation with me. I'll start with just a little bit of context about me and what I'm interested in. This has been different each time I've done it, so I never know quite what will come out because I didn't write a script. But I'm Alma. I work as a clinician in children's services, and I was a social worker before that and a youth worker before that. And in all my time in all those roles, I've been interested in power, in oppression, and in what happens to people and families in the difficult situations that they get placed in. And sometimes I felt like the ways that we're trying to help aren't helpful. And coming across writing like yours and some of the other people I've been talking to about resistance has really helped me think of the work differently and try and work differently. But sometimes I feel clumsy and like I'm not quite managing to do what I intend to do. So my hope is that talking to people like you will help me make sense a bit more of how to be with people in ways that are helpful. So that's my hope. Can you tell me a little bit about you and when the concept of resistance first became important to you?
Yeah. Oh gosh. Okay. That's an interesting question. I'm thinking about where to start, and in what context I might think of that being a beginning in a way. Just to say though, in relation to your last point, that I always feel clumsy when I'm talking. So yeah, I really relate to that. And that's just talking in general, not even just talking to clients and talking about these issues. So more about me. I'm Taiwo, which means firstborn twin, so I'm a twin. I'm also Nigerian, British born, from a family of 5 children. We're all very close to my parents. And I'm also a psychologist, clinical psychologist and a family therapist. And I came into the profession with a real kind of critical view of the profession, which I think is in relation to your question of when I first started to think about the importance of resistance. It was probably before I came into the profession, although thinking about how it connects to mental health and connects to intervention of some kind probably came a bit later. But so I've always been quite critical of the mental health system. I'm from a family that talks a lot about kind of issues, sort of social issues, and but not in a kind of intellectual way, just in a sort of there's a real sense in my family that I was part of a global community, and we were talking about things as though we were talking about people that we cared about and who were our sort of neighbours, as it were, even though they might be kind of global neighbours rather than actual kind of neighbours. And so I was exposed to a lot of kind of critical thinkers. So in a way, a lot of the stuff I was exposed to, both in terms of the stuff I was reading and the books that were around me, and the images of people around me, and also I went to supplementary Saturday schools. This was very popular in the kind of 80s, particularly for children from the Black and Black African Caribbean community. There was lots of sort of learning about resistance in a sense, and resistance theories and theorists there. But also that my parents, particularly my dad, but both of them, are sort of their political and spiritual kind of leanings as well are very much about, I think I was kind of socialized to be, I'm trying to think of the right word, not wary of, but maybe critical of mainstream knowledge, as opposed to the opposite. I was, so even things like, mainstream medicine, for example, like my dad is very sort of interested in sort of natural approaches to well-being, and the idea that that there's more to systems of health than the kind of mainstream medical approach. I feel like I'm going in lots of different directions, but it feels like it's all part of the context, in the sense that, in a way, by being socialized that way, meant that when I came across critical thinking or social constructionist ideas, they made sense to me, because I was already socialized to be very aware that there were other cultural ways of thinking about mainstream ideas like health, and that there was something about the dominant view being one that was to be held lightly, and rather than just to assume that that is the way that things are. So in a way, that's the kind of resistance, isn't it? A resistance to dominant ideas and dominant discourses and dominant ways of thinking about how you respond. So, for example, if I had a headache, I was taught not to just pick up a headache pill, but to try and work out why I've got a headache and try and find natural ways of. So I know how to get rid of a headache now, for example. So I think in explicit ways, I think resistance has always been there in my life, in growing up, but not explicitly named as such. In my family, my parents, for example, never talked about racism, so I kind of discovered it myself in a way. I think maybe it was their way of trying to protect us, maybe, I don't know, but there was no explicit conversation about racism from my parents. My older siblings, I'm the youngest myself, my twin sister, would talk about issues of power and difference, and racism being one of those, but not my parents as such. So I came across it through my siblings, but also through the things that we read. So I read, I was reading like Audre Lorde and Malcolm X and Martin Luther King and bell hooks maybe a bit later, but the kind of, or even some of the novels and literature I was reading were from kind of critical perspectives and were stories of resistance. So I think it was kind of always kind of there in my life, which is why I'm finding it hard to pinpoint particular place it came into my life, because I almost feel like saying it came in through conception, I don't know, or birth or something. But in terms of bringing it more into the context of well-being, that definitely predated me even coming into psychology, because I was interested in the link between mental health and social context at quite a young age, and that meant I wanted to be some kind of anti-oppressive activist or kind of mental health activist or anti-racist activist or something before I decided to go into the route of psychology. And I'm not sure if I've answered your question in a direct way or not.
You absolutely have. I think in another role where I've done sort of activism and training people around inclusion work, we've sometimes asked, like, what's gotten you here? And I feel like there's this mix of stories of the things we want to avoid and the things we want to stop from happening, those sorts of moments where something horrible has happened to them or to somebody that was precious to them. And then there's those other stories which seem more like what you're talking about, of the Saturday school or the values or the sort of concept that actually we can hold lightly dominant discourses. We don't have to believe everything we're told, those sorts of values. That is what we want more of, or sort of if you're in that activist mindset where you're thinking quite strategically of how do we create change, that's kind of the stuff that we want to build, so that there's fewer instances of harm that mean people seek out activism, right? It's this funny sort of, you know, we still want activists, but we want to reduce the amount of activists forged by oppression, forged by harm.
Yes.
So yeah, I resonate a lot with some of those stories. I was curious about, but I don't want to get sidelined, the sort of no explicit talk of racism combined with the Saturday school, which feels like a place that would have.
But that was my sibling that taught me to that.
Oh, really? That wasn't a sort of.
It wasn't my parents. Yeah. So, but it was much more explicitly talked about from my siblings, but not. But I don't think I've ever heard my parents. I know they did actually. I think when I got older, talked about their experiences of racism, but there was no sort of this is the world and let's talk about you in the world in relation to this that I can remember. But yeah, definitely my siblings. And that's interesting in itself because somehow they maybe weren't explicitly talking about it, but they were creating a context where our siblings were thinking about it and reading about it and telling us about, talking to us about it. So it was in the space in some kind of way, even if it didn't feel like it was a kind of explicit, the way that I'm doing with my children, kind of explicitly giving it a name and talking about it and highlighting it and bringing a permission to bring it into our conversations kind of approach to my way of parenting. So yeah. And also what I call activism now, when I was younger, I didn't see it that way. I just saw it as so even the idea of resistance, this is why maybe I'm struggling a bit to find a particular space, is that it was it's always been there in a way, because just by virtue of being me and being us, the world didn't fit. And so in some ways we tried to assimilate. So I wanted to have long flowy hair, and I remember putting a towel on my head and flicking it about, which I think is very common for Black females, or to talk a certain way, or dress a certain way, or not be too colourful and that kind of thing. But then coming into a space where you're being more authentic means in a way resisting those things, having to resist, what are these ideas that say that I need to look a certain way or talk a certain way, or that colour somehow is a bad thing, or gets mentioned in a way that feels like so something about how it almost feels like it's such an integral part of me in my life as well, that I'm not sure, it has kind of come in.
Is that the same for the skepticism that you had around mental health processes being problematic, or the sort of interest in mental health and social context? Was that
I'm not sure what's happened, but you've gone again.
Oh, don't worry.
I can't see you, so I'm talking blind.
It's the Google Meet one, not a Zoom link.
Yeah, but it's completely gone. I can't see any gig. I can't even see any of my. It's very strange. It's just my desktop. Anyway,
is it bothering you?
It'd be nice to be able to see you, actually, just because I find it hard to hear without seeing you. But I'm not sure how to get back into it, because it's not. Everything's disappeared. It's really bizarre. I'm not sure what's happened. Is it okay just to pause for a second? I'm so sorry, Alma.
Don't worry.
I should have warned you that I'm a bit of a